Emma Wilson fidgeted with the lanyard around her neck, her visitor badge swinging as she trailed behind her sister Jessica through Georgetown University's crowded Healy Hall. The Gothic architecture loomed above them, impressive but intimidating to a 12-year-old who would rather be at soccer practice. "Can we get lunch soon?" Emma asked, tugging at Jessica's sleeve. Jessica, a high school senior with college applications on her mind, barely glanced back. "After this panel, it's supposed to be really good. Students talking about campus life." Emma sighed. Their parents' last-minute work commitments had left Jessica in charge of this college visit, and Emma as the reluctant tag-along. She followed her sister into the auditorium, where rows of chairs were rapidly filling with prospective students and their families. They found seats near the middle as the moderator introduced the panel of current students. Emma was half-heartedly listening until she heard a familiar name. And joining us today is sophomore Barron Trump, who is studying computer science and international relations. Emma straightened in her seat. She recognized him from news clips and social media, taller now than in the images she remembered from years ago. He seemed comfortable on stage despite being the only panelist whose name everyone already knew. As the panel progressed, Emma found herself surprisingly engaged. The students discussed classes, dorm life, and extracurricular activities with humor and honesty. Barron spoke thoughtfully about finding your own path despite external expectations. Emma's mind drifted to the small gold cross necklace her grandmother had given her before passing away 3 months ago. "For when you have questions," Grandma Wilson had said, closing Emma's fingers around it. Since then, Emma had been wrestling with questions about faith that felt too big for her 12 years. Questions her busy parents acknowledged, but never quite had time to discuss deeply. When the moderator opened the floor for questions, Emma surprised herself by raising her hand. Jessica hissed, "What are you doing?" But it was too late. The moderator had already pointed to Emma. Standing on shaky legs, Emma took the microphone offered by an aide. The large room suddenly felt impossibly quiet. "Hi, I'm Emma," she began, her voice smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I have a question for Barron." She paused, gathering courage. "I was wondering about your faith, not in a political way or anything, but how has it helped you figure things out, especially when you're not sure what to believe anymore?" The question hung in the air. Emma saw Jessica's mortified expression and immediately regretted speaking. Adults exchanged glances. Someone coughed. But then she looked at Barron, who seemed to be considering her question with genuine thought rather than discomfort or dismissal. The momentary silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was the pause of someone preparing to answer something important with care. Barron adjusted the microphone, his tall frame leaning slightly forward. The auditorium remained silent, attendees curious about how he would handle such a personal question from a young girl. "Thank you, Emma," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "That's actually one of the most honest questions I've been asked in a while." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. Emma felt Jessica relax slightly beside her, no longer radiating embarrassment. "Faith isn't something I talk about much publicly," Barron continued. "Not because I'm ashamed of it, but because it's personal to me. But your question deserves a real answer." He shifted in his seat, looking directly at Emma rather than addressing the broader audience. "When I was about your age, maybe a little older, I started having similar questions. Growing up in the spotlight made it complicated. There were people who assumed they knew everything about my family's beliefs, people who wanted to use faith as a political weapon, and others who dismissed it entirely. A few adults in the audience nodded, recognizing this reality. The thing is, Emma, faith isn't supposed to be a performance. It's a journey. For me, it became my quiet center when everything around me was chaos. He smiled slightly. And college? Well, college is definitely a place where your beliefs get challenged. Barron gestured to his fellow panelists. My freshman roommate was an atheist with excellent questions. My favorite professor is Jewish and has this incredible way of talking about sacred texts. I've attended Catholic Mass, Baptist services, and even Buddhist meditation sessions with friends. He leaned back, his expression thoughtful. The most important thing I've learned is that doubt isn't the opposite of faith. It's actually part of it. The people I admire most religiously are the ones who keep questioning, keep searching. Emma nodded unconsciously, thinking of her grandmother's words. When my grandfather passed away last year, Barron said, his voice softening, I struggled. I was angry, confused. I didn't understand why prayers weren't answered the way I wanted. A momentary emotion crossed his face before he continued. But faith gave me a language for grief. It reminded me that being human means wrestling with the big questions, not having all the answers. And it connected me to a community when I needed it most. He straightened in his chair. So to actually answer your question, Emma, my faith has helped me by giving me roots, but also wings. Roots in traditions and wisdom that came before me, but wings to explore and find my own way. It's not about having everything figured out. It's about being honest about what you don't know, while still choosing hope. Barron smiled at her. And it sounds like you're already asking exactly the right questions. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with reflection. Then someone began to applaud, others joining until the room filled with sound. The moderator had to raise her voice to bring attention back to the panel, dabbing quickly at the corner of her eye before calling on the next person with a question. Emma sat down, cheeks flushed but heart lighter. Jessica squeezed her hand silently. For the first time since her grandmother's funeral, Emma felt something inside her settle. Not with answers, but with permission to keep asking questions. I still can't believe you did that, Jessica said as they exited the auditorium. The college exposition continued around them, but neither sister was paying attention to the colorful booths and eager recruiters anymore. I know. I'm sorry if I embarrassed you, Emma replied, looking down at her sneakers. Jessica stopped walking and turned to face her sister. Are you kidding? That was brave. Really brave, Em. She shook her head with a small smile. I wouldn't have had the courage to ask something so real. Emma blinked in surprise. Compliments from her older sister were rare treasures. As they made their way toward the cafeteria, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a faculty badge approached them. Excuse me, she said. You're the young lady who asked that question about faith, aren't you? Emma nodded, suddenly nervous again. I'm Dr. Reeves. I teach comparative religion here. She extended her hand, shaking Emma's formally as though she were an adult. That was quite a question you posed. In 20 years of teaching, I've found that the students who ask such questions are the ones who truly learn. Thank you, Emma managed. Keep asking them, Dr. Reeves said with a warm smile before continuing on her way. During lunch, Emma noticed several people glancing their way, some with approving nods. One parent even stopped by their table to tell Emma her question had sparked a valuable conversation with her own teenager. As they were preparing to leave campus, a student volunteer hurried toward them. "Emma Wilson?" When Emma nodded, the volunteer handed her a folded note. "Barron asked me to give you this." Alone in the car with Jessica driving, Emma finally unfolded the note. "Emma, thank you for your question today. It reminded me why I chose to speak at these events in the first place. For genuine connections, not just appearances. Someone wise once told me that questions asked with an open heart are prayers in themselves. Keep asking yours. Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about finding meaning in the questions." Barron Emma carefully folded the note and tucked it into her jacket pocket, next to her grandmother's cross. The following week, Emma sat at the kitchen table with her parents, something that had become increasingly rare in their busy household. "So," her father said, setting down his coffee mug, "tell us more about this discussion group you want to start." "It's just a space for kids to talk about big questions," Emma explained. "Not just about religion, but about meaning. Mrs. Hargrove said she'd sponsor it if you approved." Her mother reached across the table and took Emma's hand. "This is because of what happened at Georgetown, isn't it? Jessica told us about your question." Emma nodded. "After Grandma died, I had all these thoughts bottled up inside me. But when I asked that question and heard Barron's answer, it was like discovering I wasn't the only one trying to figure things out." Her father's eyes softened. "Your grandmother would be proud, Emma. She always said faith grows best when it's discussed openly, not hidden away." 2 weeks later, Big Questions Club held its first meeting in Mrs. Hargrove's classroom. 8 students, some religious, some not, some uncertain, gathered in a circle. Emma had prepared discussion prompts, but found she didn't need them. Once one person started sharing their thoughts, others naturally followed. That evening, Emma sat on her bed, writing in the journal her parents had given her for the club. She documented not just what was said, but how people's faces changed when they felt truly heard, perhaps for the first time. On her nightstand sat her grandmother's cross and Barron's note, reminders that sometimes the most important moments in life come not from having all the answers, but from asking a sincere question and listening with an open heart to what follows. As she closed her journal, Emma thought about the ripples from that day at Georgetown, how a single question had somehow created space for many more, and how those questions were now connecting people in ways she never expected. There was something powerful in that, something that felt a lot like faith itself.